Whether you love it or you hate it, the idea of a $5,000 Doge stimulus check is something that's being seriously talked about in Washington. So in today's video, I want to share with you some of the things that are happening that are making it less likely that the Doge stimulus checks are going to happen. Okay, this is from CNBC, and the article is called "Why Trump's Economic Policies May Have Canceled the Doge Dividend Check, at least for now." And they talked to several smart people, several economists, several people that have the background to have an educated opinion on whether this is going to happen or not. They talked to people both on the pros and on the negative side and why it's less likely to happen now. First off, they quote President Trump and say Trump has expressed support in the recent past, and this is a quote from President Trump. "My channel's not political. I just want to give you the information." Trump said, "I love it, a 20% dividend, so to speak, for the money we're saving by going after waste, fraud, and abuse and other things happening," Trump has told reporters at one point in the past. And the article goes on to say, while the idea of a no-strings check may sound enticing, many economists warn that it's a bad idea. So the first one on the negative side of things comes from MDRN, Modern Capital CEO Aaron Kirksena. And Aaron says dumping $5,000 per person in the economy sounds great on paper, but it's essentially pouring gasoline on an already hot fire. And I assume that he's talking about inflation. And then the CNBC talks to Trump's head of the National Economic Council, Kevin Hassett. Now, this is on a positive side. And he said in the CNBC interview that the Doge dividend check makes a great deal of sense, and he has argued that anyone saying it would stroke inflation doesn't understand economics. So let's hear what he has to say. "Everybody says that the Doge stimulus check, is inflationary if we mail these checks to these people. Well, think about if the government spends the money, they spend $1 and you get whatever multiplier effect you think of that's going to happen on that if they don't spend the money and they give it back to the people. Then if they spend $1, then it's a wash. If they save some of it, inflation goes down." It's the idea that it's inflationary is just, again, people should study their economic textbooks a little bit before they make partisan points. Now, I'm not going to make any partisan point, but what I think he is saying here is whether the government spends the dollar or they save the dollar and give it to you and I to spend, I think what he's saying here is that it makes no difference. Either way, that dollar is being spent. I understand that argument, and frankly, so much of this is so complicated, it's hard to know, what the impact is going to be. And this is not my area of expertise. I'm just sharing the news with you because I think you should know about this. Okay, John W. Diamond, who is the CEO of Tax Policy Advisors, he's against it. He says, "I cannot get behind the Doge dividend. It doesn't make sense to cut spending to reduce the deficit and turn around and send it back to the taxpayer." Diamond said, "I think 100% should go to deficit reduction. There's no reason to return the money to current taxpayers. We would just be imposing a bill on future taxpayers." That makes a lot of sense to me. I'm not, my point of view on this isn't important, but that does make a lot of sense to me. The CNBC article goes on to say the administration is leaning into economic growth through investment and tax incentives, not direct cash handouts. So these are the priorities that Kirksena is saying that the Trump administration has. He goes on to say that Trump's focus on tariffs and domestic production suggests he's looking to shift money towards industries, not directly into people's pockets. That also makes some sense to me. I should say, the argument of whether the government spends the dollar or you and I spend the dollar, that makes sense to me too, as to how it could be a wash. And I'm going to get to my views here in a minute, but let me just close with Jerome Powell's statements. The Fed's chair, Jerome Powell, said after its FOMC meeting that a good part of any higher inflation would come from tariffs, but an economic growth decline would balance that out, although it could delay the Fed's progress in hitting its 2% inflation target. So that was a very carefully worded statement here, right? He says that higher inflation would come from tariffs, but economic growth decline would balance that out. So it sounds like he's saying, it's going to make his job harder, but it's not the inflation gasoline that people are thinking it is. Again, I'm just reading into this. So what does this mean? And very importantly, what does this mean to you and I? Well, the first thing I would say, having been a financial advisor for over 20 years, is just looking at the fundamentals for any of us as a family. I think it's super important that no matter how much money we make, we spend less than what we earn, because that's where we get the base for our savings. Part two to that first part of three prongs of building wealth, that spend less than what you earn. Part two to that is it's not enough to save. We also have to invest that money. So how does that apply to the government? Well, right or wrong, I draw many parallels between uh, the government spending their money and being fiscally responsible, and families spending their money and being fiscally responsible, right? We have different but similar duties, right? If you have kids, yes, we're trying to save money, but we're also trying to provide opportunities for them. Yes, it's important that we spend less than what we earn, but we also want them to, be, if they're into basketball or playing music, or they're very studious and they're into academics, we want to encourage that. We want to plan for that. And so we invest in that. Likewise for the government, as long as they're investing in projects that are going to make it easier for our country to succeed and for our country to compete against the world, as long as they're investing in projects that help that goal, those are investments that hopefully will pay a dividend to the taxpayer. The other thing, just like any of us, if we had a child that, for whatever reason needed financial assistance, maybe they had a handicap of some sort, and we'd want to provide help for them, just like I think part of the government's role is to provide a safety net for those that are less fortunate. And we need to balance things out. And so I think there are some parallels. It's not the greatest example to give, but I do think that there's some parallels. And I think spending our money fiscally prudently, while also providing for those that have less, that need some assistance, I think getting that balance right is important. I do think there's some fundamental programs. Social Security is certainly one of those. Again, not a political statement, but for those of us that have paid into the system for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, the statement from a politician a long time ago, a promise made is a promise kept. I think when it comes to something like Social Security, that over half of all Americans report that over half of their spending in retirement is supported by Social Security checks. We need to look at that. We need to do what we can to protect that so that our seniors don't become the most vulnerable people in society. If you enjoyed this video, the YouTube algorithm says this is the next one of my videos that you should watch. Thanks for watching this one, and I'll see you in that one. Bye-bye.